Want to keep your dollars and cents? Then download the Sense app from the Office of Financial Readiness. That's Sense, S-E-N, $E, to save for retirement, build credit, create a spending plan, or buying a home. You can't do any of those things without money. So if you have Sense, you'll download the Sense app. That's S-E-N, $E, today. And be sure to follow at DoD FinRed on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And welcome to the Fast Take. I'm Rod Rodriguez. That's Jack Murphy. So this may not be such a fast take. We often do this, don't we? We call these fast takes, but they end up being just as long as the regular episodes. But a lot has happened in the last couple of weeks. We have been doing the Future War series on China, which Jack has been an absolute beast at presenting some of these amazing guests, talking about everything from intelligence to espionage and the strategic levels, the strategic overview of China and as an adversary. And then finally, this last episode, we talked about future war with China. What would that look like? Why would we go to war? And then, of course, the very serious implications of, two nuclear superpowers having a spat over some potentially uninhabited islands. And if that wasn't enough to talk about, during these last 3 episodes, we also dealt with the evacuation of Afghanistan, our withdrawal from Afghanistan, then the 20th anniversary of 9/11. So a lot to unpack. Jack, where do you want to start?
And that's the question. Thanks for throwing that back to me, Rod. Where do I start with all of that? History seems to have increased its pace as it grinds faster than it used to, it seems, over the last couple of years, between the pandemic, Afghanistan winding down, 9/11. I mean, it feels like we're in this period of soul searching right now as a country, between the pandemic, the end of the war, the 20-year anniversary of 9/11. I wish I had the answers. I wish I had, something witty to say for the fast take, but I don't. I think that there's a lot of necessary introspection that needs to take place, on ourselves and then at our country as a whole. Not to rake ourselves over the coals. And I think I've said in the past, there's a lot of veterans out there who are having to ask themselves some really difficult questions right now. And I don't mean to point my finger and blame anyone, or I don't think they need to feel like they already feel like they don't need to feel worse. I'm sorry, guys. So it's not about playing the blame game, blaming some young Marine or soldier out there who did his job. It's more that we need to just take a look at the war as a whole and see what we can learn from it. And then those lessons learned, they need to be institutionalized into our government and our culture. I can't emphasize that enough. I had this conversation with a retired Special Forces colonel just last night about how H.R. McMaster wrote a whole book about Vietnam and the mistakes that were made. And even as a subject matter expert, this was not a dumb guy. This was a smart person. He was a highly qualified general, articulate, intelligent man. And he could not break free from being a part of the repetition of those mistakes and doing it again. And that says something about us as a culture and our institutions, that the way they're shaped, the way they're designed, the way we think lends itself to repeating these mistakes over and over. And so we really need to change ourselves and change our culture and how we approach and how we engage around the world.
It's weird because I thought the timing of the Future War series on China was interesting because we started talking about China. I think the first episode was kind of like a strategic overview
yes.
of China as a whole. understanding what their mentality was, how they thought, what the government was really thinking. And I say they, and I'm not trying to lump as in every Chinese person thinks this way that lives in China. They're as diverse of mindset as anywhere else, but the Chinese government really. And as we're talking about this, we were, first episode, second episode, we were watching the things develop in Afghanistan. We knew what was coming. Afghanistan occurs, we do the withdrawal, and suddenly it is the entire country becomes a political minefield, which I thought was interesting because a lot of Americans, I felt like, forgot Afghanistan even existed.
Right.
They thought that, we killed Osama bin Laden 10 years ago. Oh, well, then we must have left, right? Like, no, we've been there for 20 years. It was a shock.
It's really interesting to see the amount of scrutiny that final airstrike in Afghanistan has gotten. The one that it appears now we killed a family of like 11 people. It was supposed to be a retaliatory airstrike for the IED blast that killed those Marines at the airfield. And so that was kind of the last airstrike we did in Afghanistan. And that's received all this scrutiny and all this attention and all this press focus on it. And the media, some big newspapers, the Washington Post did a whole analytical breakdown on it. And they did good work. They did. And the Department of Defense eventually came around, and it took them some time, but they got there to say, we made a mistake. We screwed up. And I can't just help looking at that. And it's like, you saw the story I did for Connecting Vets, where we were in Afghanistan for decades doing airstrikes that had no scrutiny put on them, no oversight, really. I mean, there was oversight. There were these mechanisms, and sometimes they functioned better than others. But there were so many airstrikes that happened where we just killed some random guy, and there was no real oversight. There was no real after action review on it. That we're going to put all this scrutiny on it. We're going to figure out what we did, and then we're going to not do that again. So to your point, I feel like, yeah, people don't understand, like, this has been going on for several decades in Afghanistan.
When I heard the administration, when I heard the government, I'm not going to say the administration. I think that's not fair. I'm going to say the government. I think when the government said that they were going to retaliate for the attack on Kabul, I remember distinctly thinking and actually saying to my own wife, I said, I hope they don't F this up. We need a solid retaliation. Please don't F this up. And then it was F'd up. I was like, God damn it.
Yeah. And I can say this now that that we've done a total withdrawal and everyone's gone, but JSOC had some targeting packets that they were prepared to launch on and send operators to go kick some ass. But for reasons I'm not aware of, they didn't get the green light.
And I think that's the frustration a lot of folks are feeling, is that there wasn't green lights. But at the same time, I also don't want to be too much of a couch quarterback and say, well, I would have done things differently. I would have definitely really kicked the teeth in. Oh, well, I don't know that. There's always, and that's something I have to I want to remind our listeners, is you have to resist the urge and temptation to think that you know better or that we would have done things differently. There are always, and I can speak coming out of the intelligence community, there are always factors and circumstances that you do not understand. And it doesn't mean that you're stupid and that you couldn't understand it, but there are circumstances and factors that you don't have an accurate view of. So I try to give the benefit of a doubt that whatever airstrike was the most viable thing at a given time. Maybe the weather was bad. Maybe the teams were too far. Maybe there wasn't enough data to confirm that whatever target the JSOC guys were after was going to be there. We just don't know.
There was also political pressure. I mean, wasn't it coming right from the White House? Wasn't they were saying like there's going to be hell to pay for this?
Yeah. And that's the other factor is when you're pressured, and we can look at Iraq. Iraq is the perfect example of what happens when the government and the administration at the time, and I will say that the administration, this administration as well, when any administration puts pressure on the DoD to get something done, something will get done.
Yeah.
Something will get done. Now, whether it's the right thing or not, that's the bigger question. But we look at Afghanistan, and I draw the parallels, and I talked about it a little bit during the last fast take on China. Was our adversaries have seen us fight for 20 years. And they know what we can and cannot do. If anything, we have I feel like we've tipped our hand about how we operate, how we handle things, to the point that video games are made. I remember years ago when if you had said something about a colored tier, you would have been quietly whisked into another room and told to shut the hell up and who were you've been talking to and whatnot.
Because the color system was classified.
It was absolutely classified.
Which is it's funny too, because we create these cute code words. It's a classified color code for a classified unit name. Like what? Why?
And before you know it, my kid's over here like, yeah, so I'm playing Call of Duty and I got some Delta guys and this colored tier guy, and this. I'm like, I'm sorry, what? Yeah, in the game I got to run an SDR to make sure I got no tail. I'm like, what? What? Hold on, kid, let me play this game. And I'm like watching people in video games talk about American tradecraft, about American tactics, and my son, before he went to boot camp, probably knew more about the M4 and the optics than anything I could have possibly thought of when I went to boot camp 20 years ago. I didn't know about, and my kids out there playing these games that are probably more real than any of our DoD simulators.
It's a really interesting phenomenon to me how like the classification system, the way it currently works is like a lot of times it's only keeping things secret inside the bureaucracy, right? And like the only people who think it's working are the people who have top secret clearances and work in a skiff. I remember years ago, I published an article about covert operations in Syria, and the overall program name that the CIA was running was called Timber Sycamore, and I published that in an article. Operation Timber Sycamore, whatever. And I got a message from a friend of mine, an old friend who's still in the special operations community. And he's like, man, I really wish you had not like used the 2-word, named program, in your article. And I was like, you realize it has a Wikipedia page, right? And he was like, what? And goes there, and yeah, there's a whole Wikipedia page about the CIA covert op. It's just really interesting to me how like the people in the bureaucracy think the secrecy is working, that we're keeping everything on the down low. But then, as you say, back in the real world, here's a 12-year-old kid talking about TF Green running SDRs in the streets of Kabul.
Yeah, it comes back down to I often, when I'm lecturing or when I'm teaching young humaniters, I often play this game where I ask them, what organization is considered the top U.S. organization for intelligence? What would you call them? And they're like, well, the CIA. Okay, cool. What is the name of the top office for intelligence for China? I don't know. What does a Chinese NCO's uniform look like? I don't know. Okay. Have you ever played a video game or saw a movie where Chinese intelligence or Chinese special operations guys were conducting a very realistic looking thing, some type of operation. And I'm not talking about a Jackie Chan Operation Condor thing. Just give me something realistic. Like, have you seen a Chinese equivalent of a Jason Bourne movie or a film that depicts the heroics of a special operations team in China? No? They know more about you than you know about them by a long shot.
Much more.
Far. Yeah, exactly. So, and I'm going to bring it back down to Afghanistan and China in our episodes because they understand we don't have a stomach for protracted long wars.
Hold it there, buddy. We just fought a 20-year-long war.
We don't have a stomach for it. and I will say that, yes, we did fight a 20-year-long war. But what is 20 years in the long run? I mean, if you have a 100-year plan, 20 years is nothing. It's a drop in the bucket. How many presidents presided over the Afghan war?
What, 4?
Yeah. If China goes to war with you, there'll be one. There's going to be a pretty long, solid plan.
Well, there are some assumptions built into that.
There are.
China doesn't know because they've never fought a war like that.
That's true. That's true.
Can their bureaucracy withstand that? When Chinese soldiers start coming home dead, I mean, we've seen with COVID that they're able to cover up and control the narrative quite a bit, including the deaths. But I mean, if Chinese soldiers start dying in a foreign battlefield and they start coming home in caskets, they're going to have to figure out how to keep the lid on that and stop the population from getting upset about it. And there's a lot of questions. And that's one of the things that I talked about with Dr. Roger Cliff was why China could end up going to war. Like right now, they understand that the price of going to war would be so high. For them, you know, all parties concerned really, but particularly they see the cost for them would be so high it just isn't worth it for them to go and instigate a fight with Taiwan. But he made the point that, you know, if something happens internally in China, if the government destabilizes and the government needs to drive up nationalism internally, that might be the trigger point for them to go and get squirrely out there in the Pacific.
And I think that's kind of the direction I was going with, is that they kind of understand, and I think the world will understand. They get what the American sentiment looks like, especially right now. I do not feel confident that the American people would get behind fighting a near-peer adversary over an island. An uninhabited island, maybe it's an incursion. Taiwan might present some interesting and unique challenges for the American consumption or the American, I guess the American processing of whether or not this is the fight they want to have, especially right now coming out of Afghanistan.
I agree that, you know, the half submerged rocks that are just visible at low tide, like Americans aren't willing to go fight a war over that. And you can explain like the geostrategic concerns. That's over most people's heads and they don't really care. But what happens is we're already in the region, and, you know, what'll happen is, you know, an American aircraft carrier gets sunk per se. And then that becomes the motivating factor for the war. It's not going to be the rocks. It's the fact that a couple hundred sailors are dead or whatever the case may be. That's going to be the galvanizing, you know, Tonkin Bay, if you will. That's probably the poor comparison. But
I was just about to say, go ahead. But yes.
But that could be I'm just saying that the catalyzing event won't be, you know, a bunch of rocks, or maybe not even Taiwan itself. It'll be the fact that a bunch of American service members just got blasted off the face of the earth by the Chinese.
I agree with that to an extent. And I think, man, I feel like 20 years ago, we would have been more apt to go and fight and avenge a sunken cruiser or a sunken, American boat of any sort. But today, I feel like we are so skeptical and so angry with the government and everything. Everything is a lie. Everything is political. Everything has a second edge to it. That if we had a boat blow up, there would be so many people that would be demanding, I want to see video of this boat blowing up. I want to see the family, because
Biden blew up his own boat to start the war. It would be all that kind of crazy. And you're absolutely right. The low trust in institutions and in government, and how divided the country is, like, that all has very serious implications. And I think it was Matthew Brazil, the second part of the China series. He asked the question, could there be another greatest generation? Could Americans band together and in this case fight, the scourge of communism? In the last century, we slapped down three would-be hegemons: Nazi Germany, Imperial Japan, and the Soviet Union. Americans like to fight. We do. That's a part of who we are. I mean, even with an all-volunteer force, there are always dudes who are manning up and want to go join the Marine Corps, like your son. Is he infantry?
You know it.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, Rod. Like there is no shortage of dudes like that in this country that want to be a Marine, that want to be a Ranger, that want to go and kick some ass. But yeah, can we as a country unify around a common cause like that again? That's a good question.
And that's a dangerous question. When I'm listening to, and I would encourage everyone, if you get a chance to just listen to these 3 episodes back to back to back, I think that there is something to be said about hearing it all in one blurb, because there's a lot to digest, but there's also a lot of pieces that you don't want to overlook.
Yeah.
And the part that really got to me was the psychological effect, the mindset that the Americans have today. And to that point about the greatest generation, that greatest generation had something to prove. I feel like they were untested, but they felt like at the time they could conquer everything.
Well, they were also hard men who grew up during the Depression.
Yes.
I mean, these were rough guys,
Well, I think there wasn't as much awareness, social awareness at the time. And that is, that I hear people talk about woke culture and this and that. And we did an episode about that, because I think that's an unfair lumping in of different ideas. I think it's important to be woke to social injustice. And anybody that tells me there hasn't been social injustice in the United States is obviously just living under a rock, and they don't want to hear that no union is perfect.
But I've never experienced racism, Rod, so I don't think it exists.
Yeah, exactly. Like, of course not. I mean, there are definitely disadvantaged people in this country, and there have been for forever. Does woke take some extremes? Absolutely, and I'm against those extremes 100%. But at
I wasn't really trying to make the woke argument. Right. I was just saying that Americans today are kind of pampered.
No. And that's my point. That's exactly my point, is that at the time, there was no level of that awareness. So these were people who had strong convictions about what they believed at the time. And they had gone through hell and back with this depression. They had seen the world that they knew turned upside down economically. They had to fight back. So they were hard people. They were hard mindset, hard everything. They were ready to fight and prove that this country was something different. And I think there was this idea of good versus evil, very strong. It was a time when you could easily say they are bad, we are good. And there was hardly any of that inner awareness of like, well, maybe we're not all good, guys. Maybe maybe we have problems here.
Oh, sure. Blah, 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 blah. Well, there's a lot of whitewashing too. And I mean, the press had been more or less co-opted by the War Department So I mean, there was pro-America, pro-war propaganda everywhere. And so when we talk about like getting unified and fighting for a common cause, we got to be honest with ourselves too about that. Like, some people, we probably don't want to ask them this question, but do we really want to abolish the press and have no oversight on what our government does?
Which press are we abolishing? That's what they're going to ask you.
Right. So, I mean, we look back at that. If we look back on those days, the World War II era, we look back on it with a fondness. But I think that there are two parts to it. One that the whitewashing that took place, that, the amount of pro-war propaganda that was out there, and also behind the propaganda, we as we look back at that era with a sort of nostalgia, we don't acknowledge how absolutely fucking horrible that war was. And I'm not saying it was an unjust war or anything like that. I'm just saying it was fucking horrible. And what those guys went through, what our guys went through, was horrendous. And they experienced some really fucked up stuff. And don't let anyone tell you differently.
And I think that's the interesting about that. That's the other part about war. And it goes back to the video games. It goes back to the way we've been fighting war. People think that what we've experienced in this last 20 years between OIF and OEF was war of the scale or of they think that it's the same type of war that World War I and World War II were fought. War's war, right? It's all, war's war, but it's not. Yes, the men and women who fought in OEF were absolute warriors. They fought to the last, they fought, they gave all. But these are not wars like a world war. We have not fought again in the trenches, disease, mustard, chemical warfare, waves of mustard gas flying in the early mornings. We have not seen this scale of devastation at all during our two wars in the Middle East.
And if we reach back to our previous episode, we did one on virtual reality, and I did for the Fast Take, I interviewed Paul Shari when talking about artificial intelligence, who Paul and we served together a long time ago. Now he's a big, smart think tank guy. If another global war happens, the intensity is going to be ratcheted up also by modern technology, artificial intelligence, smart weapons, all that other type of stuff. Imagine, the Nazis waging the Holocaust, but with modern biometrics, computer and library science, the abilities to catalog people and track them. It's truly horrifying to imagine the scale and scope of a conflict like that happening today. And I've even heard, some people who should know better talking about how AIs are like the new super weapons, and they're going to be so powerful, no one's ever going to want to use them because you can't put the genie back in the bottle. I think this is very, very reckless thinking. Very reckless to think that people will not go to war because we've invented some deadly new technology.
If anything, people will want to use that. They want to see it. It's like anytime we build a shiny new weapon, we got to go out there and see it happen. I think about cyber warfare, and it's so interesting because it's not sexy. It's not as cool as talking about the latest rifle or pulse rifle or, rail guns and whatever.
I hate it. And I hate people who talk about cyber warfare. I hate listening to them and all their techno babble and blah, 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 the routers. And, we're going to get inside there and we're going to hack the SCADA systems. And I'm being sarcastic, but the reason why I don't like it is because I don't know anything about it. So what I mean by that is when we start talking about like special ops stuff and war and all this, like I have some wherewithal to like say I think that's true or not. We start talking about cyber warfare stuff, and like I do not have the wherewithal to say is this accurate? This true?
I'll tell you, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and one of my favorite shows is Darknet Diaries. Highly recommend.
Oh, yeah, it's good.
It's such a great show. You know, a couple of things that they've talked about on that show have scared the absolute bejesus out of me. So to me, I look at cyber warfare and I think, okay, China's ahead of again, relative. I don't want to say like the Chinese. I don't want to fall into that trap. Like the Chinese are this mythical dark entity hiding in a cave, and they're so much better than we are at everything. They're going to wipe us out if we don't watch our step. We are just as effective in cyber warfare, if not, we have definitely demonstrated our abilities. But what I'm saying is that cyber warfare on both sides could, to your point, Jack, lead us down a road of warfare that's going to be a new level of trench warfare, where you can't trust the water that you're pulling out of your tap. You're going to be weary about. I mean, what just happened recently with the food, right? With the meat, there was a cyber attack, caused the meat industry to kind of tank for a hot bit. All of this over Taiwan, potentially Taiwan. Will we fight for it? Will we defend it? If we do, so Chinese take it over, we go in there, we push them out, we're like, and stay out. The Chinese can sit in those shores and be like, we'll wait. We'll wait.
That would be, if that something like that happened, if they tried to invade Taiwan, we went there and fought and pushed them out of Taiwan, that would be a devastating defeat to the Chinese. That would be devastating. It might even lead to the collapse of the People's Republic of China.
I want to think that, but I do not. I don't want to. Information and the way that it's presented, and I think here in the United States we've seen information warfare at it, and it's still going on every single day. I don't know how would that get painted? Can they reframe that? Would they be able to reframe their expulsion from Taiwan? Could they change the message? Could they keep themselves in power? I don't know. Maybe 100%. Maybe
they can drive up nationalistic sentiments. About the white devil.
Yeah, lots of different ways. And would we be able to sustain our efforts? Are we willing to push them back into China? Would we continue on? Would we go for Beijing? Would we not go for Beijing? Who's going to jump into this fray? Will the Russians have a thing to say about this? It's a very that's one of the topics that we didn't really get into during this, and I was very kind of curious about it. Was the domino effect of allies. We go to war with China. Who's going to back up China? Who's going to back us up? We recently just cut a deal with the Australians, I believe, that has pissed off the French. The French just pulled their ambassadors out. I mean, I don't know if people are aware of this, but the French just pulled their ambassadors back, which is a huge thing. That you don't normally do this in international affairs.
Especially over a lost trade deal.
Especially over a lost trade deal. That has serious implications. There are some serious ramifications behind this. It goes back down to military readiness, what the deals we're cutting, who are we pissing off? And everyone talks about the French, World War II. Yeah, but you know what? The French survived. They are still a world power that
they want to see themselves that way, at least.
Yeah, true. But they're still something to be reckoned with. The French still have a very strong international presence. So I'm very curious where this is going to go. Jack, what's your takeaway, man? What was your takeaway from your Chinese future war series?
I think the biggest one from talking to the 3 experts I interviewed was that this is a serious threat. It should be taken seriously. Our government needs to take it seriously, but it's not a pending existential threat that is going to wipe us out. There's no need for fear mongering. There's no need to run around with our hair on fire. this just requires a focused, thought out, tactful approach by our government to confront this threat emanating from China, or specifically from the Chinese government. So yeah, it's not something that's going to wipe us out tomorrow, but it's something we need to take seriously and respond to appropriately.
I think that's fair. That's a very fair assessment. And I think that's also very important for folks to remember is this isn't going to happen tomorrow necessarily. There's a lot of things that will probably predicate any of these types of future war scenarios. But we need to be aware of what's happening and what that actually could look like. Because, the thing about the series, this last episode especially that caught my attention was the discussion of nuclear options. We are both nuclear superpowers. Would we use them? Are they on the table? What constitutes a threat towards their nuclear capability? If we start taking out the platforms from which they could launch a nuclear weapon, is that a signal to them?
Right.
What's
the threshold?
What is the threshold? These are serious questions that, planners and strategic thinkers are evaluating. This is where, again, we come into, you don't always have the circumstances. You don't always know everything that's going on in the background. It's really easy to say, oh, just cut off all their nuclear stuff, man, and we'll just attack. Well, that could be what sets them off in a desperation move. Maybe they think like, hey, if you take away our nuclear capability, we need to execute now. Well,
yeah, I mean, if it were that simple, we would have done it to Pakistan a while back, right? It's not so easy.
It's not so easy. Jack, what's on the future for you, man? What are you working on?
So the next episode of Military Matters, I'm actually pretty excited about to release it. It's an interview I did with Eric Kurlander, who is a historian, and he wrote a book called Hitler's Monsters. If you guys want to go do some pre-reading before the interview, it is about the Nazis and the occult. But there's way more going on in this book and in our interview than just, Himmler's obsession with ancient relics like Indiana Jones type stuff. There's a lot more going on here. His book is about the whole supernatural history of the Third Reich, how they used pseudoscience and some really bizarre theories and ideas about the world, not just the Nazi elite, but his book is interesting in that it shows how popular pseudoscience and the occult, things like astrology, the spiritualist movement, and so on, these things were very popular in mainstream German society at that time, in the interwar period, and it made people very susceptible. And what's interesting here is that the Nazis, yes, some of them were true believers in the occult, but others just saw it as a tool, as a vehicle they could use to advance the Nazi party's platform. And what they did, what they did amazingly well was the German people were in such dire straits at the time that their reality was so bad for the German people. Their pride, their dignity had been damaged. They had this huge economic crisis. They had just lost World War I. What the Nazis did was they substituted that reality for their own magical fantasy reality. They literally created an alternate universe that involved all this pseudoscience, the 1,000-year Reich, weird ideas about the Aryan racial theories and everything. So they substituted their own magical reality for the one that they were living and didn't like. And it had a real sway on people. And I think the episode is going to be kind of controversial too, because Eric doesn't hesitate to make some comparisons to some things that are happening in our country today.
Oh boy. I can't wait to read our hate mail. Folks, you can direct your hate mail towards Jack. But it's interesting because I as you were just giving in that description, I was already drawing a couple of parallels in my mind. QAnon, for example,
Yes.
folks. I'll call it. I mean, you guys already think, it's so funny. I was just making that Jack and I were talking before the recording about our, the trolls. And it's so interesting because I've gotten mail that has accused me of being a far left Antifa guy. And then I'm also a far right fascist. And I'm like, wow. Which is it, folks? Which is it? But
yeah, that's why you just start ignoring the comment section after a while.
Turn it off.
Because it's like people just have these very, very emotional responses based on their own political bias. It's funny that they'll scream at you that you're biased while having this like super biased political worldview. But I mean, I'm open to reviews of the podcast and suggestions and stuff. And if people think we screwed something up or got a fact wrong, like I'm open to that. You should hit us up and let us know.
But I think it's interesting that this conversation that you're going to have with this author, German mysticism or German Nazi. I'm going to say German Nazi mysticism of the time. It's this fantasy world, and it goes back down to why are conspiracies so prevalent? Because they're fun. It's a choose your own adventure, and you are the protagonist. You're at the heart of it. Like, what will Jack Murphy do today? It's so much cooler to think about yourself as being an enlightened patriot, a patriot.
Fighting an underground movement against a cabal of villains.
A cabal of devil-worshipping, child-eating villains. Yeah. Or that you live in a world where there's reptilian leaders and whatnot, as opposed to you're an accountant working at a company, right. You make minimum wage, or even you could be a doctor saving lives, but even that might seem not as cool as some of the allure of these fantasies. And
you're a military veteran and you are now on Civvy Street and no one knows who you are. No one understands what you did in the military, nor will they ever understand what you did in the military. You're now separated from your friends, your army buddies. You don't get to see them so often. The world that you lived in the military is gone, and now you're trying to make sense of the real world, the one that you live in, a normal mainstream society. And it's hard to understand, for all of us. We have these moments where it's difficult to understand. So people find coping mechanisms in some instances and retreat into these conspiracy theories.
100%. Well, I'm excited about this. Your episode on this strange phenomena that we saw in World War II, and that we might be seeing some glimpses of today. We still have another. I think we're at the midpoint of our season, so we've still got a whole other half of our season for you folks. I'm really excited. We got some really cool stories coming down the pipeline for you. You can check us out. We are at stripes.com. If you use promo code podcast, you're going to get 50% off your digital subscription. And folks, let me tell you something about Stars and Stripes really quick. Go check it out. You may have your own misconception. The last time you probably read Stars and Stripes was, maybe 10, 15 years ago, or during your last deployment. Go check them out, stripes.com. You can read a couple of articles for free. Our podcast is always available for you guys. We are on Apple, Spotify, anywhere you listen to your favorite podcast. That's where you're going to find Stars and Stripes' Military Matters. Like, listen, subscribe, and please share this podcast. We grow by word of mouth, really. That's how podcasts work. You can throw all the money into promos as you want, but these shows really grow by word of mouth. So share the stories that we are creating for you with your friends, your network. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter. We are StripesMMPod. You can follow Jack Murphy individually. He has his own Twitter presence. He is Jack Murphy RGR. You can follow me as well, RodPodRod. If you have any suggestions, and you can, if you want to, spend some time writing some hate mail, that's also cool. You can send it to militarymatters@stripes.com. I read every single one of your emails, the good, the bad, And we're always open for some suggestions, your feedback, or if you have a tip, you have a story we need to go after, let us know. We're very curious about what's going on in the world around you, and if there's anything we can do, we're interested. Jack, any parting thoughts? Any party shots?
No, man. I'm glad to hear that you have some stories in the pipe, because I got nothing. I got that interview with Eric, and it's very good. But that's it for me, man. I don't know. We're gonna have to talk.
I'm bringing some cyber warfare, baby. Bringing that cyber warfare flavor. We might be talking about aliens again, because they're out there, folks. Man. Don't you start with me, Jack. They're out there. I believe, and so do our audience. They're on board. Hey, who isn't up for a good alien story anyway? We've got October coming up, monsters. Did the U.S. DoD implement a lycanthropy study? We're gonna find out. I'm just kidding. No, maybe they did. I don't know.
But the next episode we talk about vampires and werewolves as well.
Holy crap. Okay. Yeah, you're probably going to get my alien story beat, but we got some good stuff coming down the pipeline. Folks, I'm Rod Rodriguez. That's Jack Murphy. We will see you at the next episode. Aries, did you know that the Office of Financial Readiness has an app? Download Sense app. That's SEN $E. Sense app has the information you need for saving for retirement, building credit, creating a spending plan, or buying a home. FinRed has the tools you need. Download Sense app for tips on the go and follow at DoD FinRed on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube.